All right, so you want to talk about a game that's got everyone buzzing, Warhammer 40,000. Space Marine 2, it's not just good, it's like shattering expectations, outselling giants, even Doom. But the really wild part, they do it by going completely against the grain.
Yeah, what's really got people talking is how Space Marine 2 found this massive success, not by, just throwing a ton of money at it, but by being really smart, really strategic about how they developed the game.
So, affordable development, which we've been teasing, honestly, affordable and video game development. Those two things don't usually go together, right?
Exactly. The industry is kind of notorious for, well, let's just say it, overspending. Think about some of those big budget games that, well, maybe didn't quite stick the landing, tried to cram in every feature imaginable. It's what we call overscoping, trying to be everything to everyone, and sometimes ending up a bit of a mess because of it.
Right, like trying to build the ultimate entertainment system, but then you just keep adding on more and more components until suddenly the wiring's a mess. It doesn't quite work the way you hope.
Perfect analogy, and we've seen it happen recently, even Conquered, right? All that hype, and it's struggling to keep players engaged. And then there was Suicide Squad, which ran into a whole different set of issues.
And those are just the recent examples. I mean, the pressure to create these mega hits, these sprawling, giant games, it's huge, especially when you think about how much it costs to make these games these days. It's got to be millions upon millions just to break even.
Absolutely, and so you've got this landscape of bigger budgets, more features, and then here comes Saber Interactive, the studio behind Space Marine 2, and they're like, hold on, we're going to try this thing called affordable development.
Which, spoiler alert, has been incredibly successful. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of how well it's doing, can you break it down for us? What does affordable development even mean in the world of video games? Like, what were the choices that they made that set them apart?
So Tim Willits, the COO over at Saber, he's actually been pretty upfront about their strategy. He's talked about how they actively fought against that urge to chase every trend, every flashy new feature. They were laser focused on what makes a Space Marine 2 game great. Brutal combat, for sure. A gripping story, obviously, all set in the Warhammer 40K universe. And then that level of polish that just makes every encounter shine.
I mean, it sounds almost too simple, right? Yeah. Just focus on the core stuff but hope for the best. That can't be it, can it?
Of course not. And that's where Saber's really deep understanding of game design comes in. They've shown that by not overreaching, by focusing on a smaller set of features, but really, really nailing them, that's how you can deliver an experience that players absolutely love. Think of it this way. Imagine you go to a restaurant, right? And they've got this massive menu, like hundreds of dishes, cuisines from all over the world. Sounds impressive, but then the food shows up and it's just kind of meh, forgettable. But then you've got this smaller place, focused menu, maybe a dozen things they've absolutely perfected. Which one are you going to remember? Which one are you going to tell your friends about?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's quality over quantity. And I'm guessing with games, that translates to focusing on how it feels to actually play it, rather than just like throwing a bunch of random ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Exactly. And the thing is, this isn't just some theory for Saber. They've actually got a track record. Look at SnowRunner, one of their other games. No microtransactions, no loot boxes, just pure off-road trucking, and people loved it. Over 15 million copies sold.
See, that's what gets me. They took this concept that honestly sounds kind of niche, right? And turned it into this massive hit. Clearly, this whole affordable development thing, it's not just some marketing ploy. It's something they actually believe in, and it's working.
It absolutely is. And the success of SnowRunner, it kind of highlights another thing Saber understands. That idea of delivering a truly polished experience. They didn't just nail the core gameplay of like driving these huge trucks through crazy environments. They obsessed over the details too.
Okay, so like what kind of details are we talking here? Give me the behind the scenes stuff.
Well, they put a ton of work into the physics engine, for one. So like the mud, the water, the terrain, it all behaves super realistically. They actually recorded the sounds of real truck engines for the game. And get this, they even went to the trouble of making sure the vehicles show wear and tear as you drive them.
Wow. So it's all those small things, right?
Yeah.
The stuff that most players probably won't even consciously pick up on. But it adds up. It elevates the whole thing. It's like the difference between watching a movie with like okay sound and then watching it with amazing surround sound. Suddenly you're immersed.
Precisely. And you see that attention to detail, that commitment to polish in Space Marine 2 as well. Take the combat, for example. It's not just shooting hordes of enemies. It's about how your chainsword just tears through them, you know? The weight behind each swing of your hammer, even the way the environments react to your weapons.
And you can't forget about the visuals, man. The way they captured that Warhammer 40K vibe, that grim, dark aesthetic, it's incredible. But you mentioned the story earlier, and as someone who's dabbled in the lore, I'm curious, how does that play into this whole less is more approach?
Yeah.
Because Warhammer 40K, that's a deep, deep rabbit hole to go down.
You're telling me Warhammer 40K has got this crazy backstory, like thousands of years of lore. It'd be easy to get lost in that, trying to explain every little thing. But Saber, they were smart about it. They focused on telling a really compelling story that fits within that universe, but it also stands on its own.
So they're not alienating newcomers who might not be familiar with all the lore, but they're also giving the diehard fans something to sink their teeth into. It's a tough balance to strike.
Exactly. And it's another example of how affordable development, when it's done right, isn't about cutting corners. It's about making smart decisions that actually make the game better for everyone.
And speaking of smart decisions, we got to talk about another one of Saber's wins, World War Z. Took a beloved franchise and managed to give it this whole new lease on life with their co-op zombie shooter. Over 25 million players. That's huge.
It really is. And again, it goes back to Saber's focus on that core experience, making it polished, making it feel really good to play. They didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They took that classic zombie shooter formula and they elevated it. Tight gameplay, satisfying guns, and that class-based system that really encourages teamwork.
I remember when World War Z came out, everyone was going crazy for the swarms, how they managed to get all those zombies on screen at once without the game, like, melting down. It was nuts.
Absolutely. It was a technical achievement for sure.
Yeah.
But what I think is even more interesting, thinking about it now, is how they handled the game after it came out, the post-launch content.
Oh, yeah. Didn't they support that game with, like, free updates and expansions for, what, like 5 years after it launched?
5 years. New missions, new classes, new enemies, weapons, all completely free. That kind of long-term support, it's almost unheard of these days, especially for a game that wasn't designed around microtransactions or a live service model.
It's almost like they actually, care about the players. Like they want to make sure people feel like they got their money's worth and then some. And they're building a community around the game, not just treating it like a one-time purchase. Okay, so we've established Saber's got the experience, the philosophy, and the track record to back it up. But let's talk about the big kahuna here, Space Marine 2. Because this isn't just a good game, this is a full-blown phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, over 2 million players on launch day. That's practically unheard of.
Yeah.
But it's more than just the numbers, right? It's the way Space Marine 2 has just captured the attention of the entire gaming world. People are talking about it, streaming it, and it's breathing new life into the entire Warhammer franchise.
And it's not just the hardcore Warhammer fans, right? Space Marine 2 seems to be pulling in a whole new crowd, people who are like, wait, what's a chainsword?
Yeah.
And suddenly they're knee-deep in bolter porn.
Totally. I've seen it everywhere. People saying they'd never even heard of Warhammer before this, and now they're hooked. They're checking out the lore. Some are even trying out the tabletop game.
Which, let me tell you, that's a commitment. Tabletop Warhammer 40K, that's not something you just casually pick up. It's a whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. Tons of rules, a million different units to paint. The fact that Space Marine 2 is getting people interested in that side of things, it says a lot about how well the game's made. It's like a gateway, right?
Totally. So we've established Space Marine 2 as a hit. Critical acclaim, commercially successful, and now it's like this cultural phenomenon. But what's the takeaway for the rest of us? Like, what can we learn from what Saber's doing, even if we're not, game developers, about to unleash a horde of orcs on the world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's easy to just see these success stories and be like, well, good for them. But what Space Marine 2 highlights, and it's something we can all relate to, is this idea of focus. How often do we spread ourselves too thin? Try to do too much at once.
Oh, all the time. I'm definitely guilty of that. Work, personal stuff, even just trying to figure out what I'm going to eat for dinner. Sometimes it's like too many options.
Yeah.
I get decision paralysis. Maybe I need Saber to teach me how to affordable development in my life.
There you go. It's so true, though, right? We live in this world where it's all about more, more, more. But Space Marine 2, it's like this reminder that sometimes the biggest impact comes from holding back a little, focusing on what really matters.
It's like that saying less is more, but like applied to everything.
Exactly. Figure out what's truly important, whether it's what you're creating or even just how you want to live your life. Don't get bogged down trying to be everything to everyone. Focus on doing a few things really, really well.
Man, that hits home. In a world that tells us to constantly do more, maybe the real challenge, the real key is figuring out what to say no to, what to cut away so you have the space to really excel at what matters.
Yeah.
Something we can all apply, whether we're making a game, running a business, or just trying to get through the day.
Couldn't agree more.
So next time you're feeling overwhelmed, remember Space Marine 2. Sometimes less really is more. And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Until next time.